Hi, everyone. We would like to welcome you to a short series of interviews with a variety of guests that are joining us during Recovery Month and Day to celebrate recovery and highlight that recovery is possible. Besides being a celebration, Recovery Month also showcases that recovery is a pathway that one cannot walk alone. Even though recovery works in parts through individual efforts, the soil and structural environments are essential. Therefore, we should put efforts in creating the right environment to recover by reducing stigma and allowing a person in recovery to grow in their own pace. Before on to the interviews, I would briefly like to introduce ourselves. My name is Cressida and I'm representing the World Federation Against Drugs, which is a multilateral community with almost 370 non-governmental organizations and over 500 individuals from 64 countries. Our members represent all regions of the world. Our common aim is to strengthen prevention, increase access to treatment, and promote recovery. And we believe that only together we can work towards reaching this goal on a global level with a gender and child-sensitive perspective. My dear colleague Mulka is representing our WFAD Gender Working Group, and I would like to hand the word over to her to introduce herself and the working group.
Everybody, my name is Mulka Nisik, and as Cressida said, I'm today on behalf of the Gender Working Group, which was created within the WFAD to specifically address the drug use and addiction among women, gender-based violence, and also its correlations with the healthcare, treatment, and recovery. It's a great honor and pleasure to have Jason Schwartz with us. So Jason, I'm going to hand over to you immediately to introduce yourself and tell us more about yourself and your work.
Sure. My name is Jason Schwartz. I'm a social worker from Ann Arbor, Michigan in the United States. I am a person in long-term recovery. I started my recovery in 1990 and we'll be celebrating 32 years next month. I've been an addiction professional for about 28 years. I started out my career as an intern at an agency called Dawn Farm in Ypsilanti in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and spent the next 25 years there as I got my master's degree and spent most of my time at Dawn Farm as the clinical director. And Dawn Farm, when I started there, was a residential program with 2 sites where people did the first phase of treatment at one site and moved to the other site for the second phase of treatment. And by the time I left in 2019, we had 2 long-term residential sites, a social detox program and crisis residential center, about 200 beds of recovery housing. We had outpatient services, recovery coaching. We had all sorts of community education and engagement around things like employment and a pretty robust education series. And my goal while I was there was to extend recovery support and treatment engagement for as long as possible, ideally, up to 5 years. So we were able to keep people in treatment and recovery housing. Of course, this was voluntary, and we had people engaged for 2 years or so, often maybe 2.5. And we were working with primary care physicians to transfer recovery monitoring to them. So I'm proud of the work we accomplished there. Since then, I was the director of behavioral health at a community hospital where we had an inpatient chemical dependence unit. And today I am the director of social work and spiritual care for Michigan Medicine, which is part of the University of Michigan health system. I've also been an adjunct faculty at Eastern Michigan University School of Social Work for about 18 years.
Wonderful. Thank you for your great introduction. You have had congratulations on your recovery milestones, first of all, but also on your work that you have been doing ever since. So you have a website, and we would like to know what is the website about and what is the background, what was done, and what is the vision of the website moving forward?
Sure. So the website today is called Recovery Review, and you can be found at recoveryreview.blog. But it actually started out as Addiction and Recovery News when I was at Dawn Farm. So at Dawn Farm, I focused a lot on the professional development of our staff. Addiction treatment has, in the United States, I don't know what it's like, in Europe and elsewhere, but in the United States had a long tradition of doing things the way we'd always done them, and sometimes uncritically. And I really wanted the staff at Dawn Farm to be very well informed about what was going on in terms of drug policy and in terms of research, and to understand why we did what we did at Dawn Farm. So I would pretty regularly send articles to our staff, and those articles grew into like a list of articles, often sometimes with some commentary a few times a week. And over time, I had people from outside of Dawn Farm saying, "Hey, I hear you send these emails with these articles and sometimes commentary on these articles. Can you add me to your list?" And I kept getting more and more people asking to be added to the list. And I would also, a lot of our staff at Dawn Farm were students, and they might use something I had sent for a research project. And they would come to me and say, "Hey, you sent something 2 months ago on such and such. Could you resend that to me?" And I'd have no memory of, exactly what they were talking about. And so this was probably in, I don't know, I guess it was 2004 or something like that, maybe a little later. And blogs were emerging, and I thought, well, blog would be an easier way to do this. That way, whenever anybody wants to find something I had sent a couple of months ago, they'd be able to search the blog and find it. So I started doing the blog, and it was really for that purpose, to support Dawn Farm staff and to develop our staff professionally, and to communicate with them about our culture and our philosophy and why we did what we did. And that carried on for, until 2019, when I left Dawn Farm. And I tried to engage other people in contributing, but I was really the sole contributor for most of that time. And then in 2019, my old boss wanted to keep the blog as a resource to Dawn Farm. So we agreed that he would keep that URL, that website, Addiction and Recovery News, and I was welcome to take all my content with me elsewhere. So I started Recovery Review and kind of copied over all the old content to the new website. And since it was no longer a Dawn Farm project, I had the freedom to involve other people from outside of Dawn Farm. So, I started off engaging some friends and some other people I know. The people who have been the most consistent contributors are Bill Stouffer, who runs a recovery advocacy organization in Pennsylvania, Brian Kuhn, who is a clinical director of a program in North Carolina called Pavilion, and some others have contributed, and David McCartney from an addiction medicine physician from Scotland, who I'm a big fan of, and have never met in person, but know him online over the years. And then we've had a few other people who have contributed something here and there, including Molly Marhar Welch and Crystal Reyes, and our orientation is very what I would consider recovery oriented. And the conceptual boundaries of recovery have gotten kind of fuzzy over the years. But when I think of recovery, I think of people's full functioning restored, and in collegiate recovery, we talk about people getting better than well. And I think that's one of the reasons I've loved working in addiction treatment, over 28 years, because we get to see people who are really severely impaired by their addiction, And a year or two later, their lives are completely transformed. Their relationships with their families, their employment paths, their place in the community are just remarkable, and their resources in their community. They're, you know, when you look at these people when they enter treatment, I think people who didn't have that experience, who hadn't worked in addiction and recovery, might imagine these people would be permanently limited in some way, and nothing could be further from the truth. So um, so we recognize not everybody's going to have that path, but that path is possible for people with addiction, and it's impossible to know who's capable of that. And you know, I've been proven wrong many times. So that's kind of the model that we embrace and try to communicate. And I think it's gotten more important because as recovery-oriented systems of care and recovery management have, I think, to some extent, I don't know, changed, transformed, and the opioid crisis has kind of elevated harm reduction to the most visible, talked about response to opioid problems. I think recovery is just as important or more important than ever. Which isn't to say that harm reduction isn't important and isn't essential, but I view it as one part of a continuum.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I mean, we at the WFAD also support that kind of approach. And what you have done with the resources and everything is, I can say, extensively used by us and our membership. So thank you again for that. And I wanted to ask you, how can people connect? Is there additional social media? Is there a newsletter? Is there like something that can nudge people kind of to get involved?
So, I mean, Recovery Review doesn't have any employees or anything like that. So it's just something that a few of us do as, I guess, kind of a passion project to some extent. So we don't really have a very organized social media presence. Our posts do get published on Facebook and Twitter, and they can be followed there. But probably the best way is to go to recoveryreview.blog, and you can sign up for email alerts as posts are published. And I would say on average these days, we have 1 or 2 posts a week published. Bill Stoker is probably the most consistent person. I used to be very consistent, but to be honest, I feel like the pandemic has sucked the wind out of my sails, and I don't publish as much as I used to. And David's stuff is always great as well.
That's great. Is there a way that people could contribute? So as you said, it's now mainly a specific group of people that are posting. But is there a way that people could contribute as well to help?
Yeah, I mean, people could definitely contact me. I believe my email is on there, but they could contact me through jfschwartz@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to consider contributions. You know, the only criteria that we have is we're not a commercial site in any way. So anybody who's seeking to promote, you know, or market a program or a model or something like that, that's not something we'd be interested in publishing. And it needs to be recovery oriented. I've had some people want to publish stuff that is, I don't know, very critical of recovery movements and very pro harm reduction. I don't mind anything that's pro harm reduction, but if it's to the exclusion of recovery, that's something that I think would just be better published elsewhere. Not that I have anything against it. So anything that's recovery oriented and kind of non-commercial. And I would say it also has to have some sort of evidence base. You know, there are a lot of people that have their own kind of niche approach, which is fine, but that's not for us either.
That's great, really. And thank you for that. And in the closing, I want to ask you, do you have any message for our members and for people in recovery for Recovery Month?
You know, I suppose I would just say that recovery is possible, you know, and I think that gets obscured, particularly as systems of care don't offer treatment and recovery support of adequate quality, duration, or intensity. And we get outcomes that reflect that failure, those systemic failures. And then people start to think that recovery is impossible and kind of lower the bar. And I think we need to be pragmatic and you know, focus on things like death prevention and reduction of disease transmission and all that kind of stuff, but we can't do that to the exclusion of recovery. You know, when we do that, we really, in some ways, abandon people that we think we're committed to, but we're really not if we're not supporting them and achieving their full potential. So I would love to see systems of care embrace harm reduction and recommit to recovery at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Jason, for this interview and for your time and for the wonderful message for our members.